Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, a fiery Senate hearing on health care policies. Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. facing criticism on recent changes at the Department of Health and Human Services defends his decisions before lawmakers. Jason Blair brings us the highlights. Washington, D.C. filed a lawsuit today accusing the Trump administration of interfering in its affairs. Does it conflict with the D.C. mayor's recent order for local coordination with the president? Arlene Richards reports. The president of Northwestern University resigning, how the Trump administration's funding cut plays into it. President Trump today urging Europe to stop buying Russian oil. Mario Tsu has more on that, plus a White House dinner hosted by the president and the first lady with tech industry leaders.
This is NTD Evening News, live from our global headquarters in New York City. Here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. House Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. defends recent firings at the HHS, as well as his previous comments on vaccines. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has more on what might be Kennedy's most fiery hearing yet.
We need unbiased, politics-free, transparent, evidence-based science in the public interest.
Health Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. made his case for the Trump administration's health care agenda in front of the Senate Finance Committee on Thursday.
We at HHS are enacting a once-in-a-generation shift from a sick care system to a true health care system that tackles the root causes of chronic disease.
Most of the hearings that Kennedy has testified at have been fiery, and this one was no exception.
Once that was your promise,
No, I didn't. No, I never promised that I was going to recommend products for which there is no indication.
When you said,
and I know you've taken $855,000 from pharmaceutical companies.
Parents and schools and teachers all over the United States of America who deserve so much better than your leadership.
You're just making stuff up, Senator.
I'm not
You're
making
just
stuff
making stuff up.
During the hearing, Kennedy faced criticism about the recent removal of CDC Director Susan Menarez, as well as some of the other changes that the HHS has implemented this year.
The largest cuts to American health care in the history of our nation.
In June, you fired every member of the well-qualified panel that was charged with recommending vaccines to the CDC.
Kennedy defended his decisions.
We are the sickest country in the world. That's why we have to fire people at CDC. They did not do their job.
Kennedy also responded to criticism about his statements on COVID vaccines and their effect during the pandemic.
We have to acknowledge that there was a cause. We acknowledge that there was a benefit. We can't quantify either one because of the data chaos at CDC. And that's all I'm saying. And they think I'm being evasive because I won't make a kind of a statement that's almost religious in nature.
Outside of the hearing, Senator Elizabeth Warren says that she wants to see recently removed CDC Director Susan Menarez testify in front of the Senate and tell her side of the story.
and explain exactly what happened when Secretary Kennedy walked in and said he wanted her to pre-approve getting rid of access to the COVID vaccine and who knows what other vaccines.
While the hearing was going on, Senator Rand Paul responded to accusations that Kennedy is sowing doubt about vaccines. Paul says he thinks the establishment is the one creating the doubt.
If the establishment keeps telling me things that are incorrect, that's where doubt comes from.
Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
As Secretary Kennedy faces questions in the Senate, conversation about the safety and efficacy of the COVID-19 vaccines is once again in the spotlight. What do everyday Americans think about vaccine mandates and the government's handling of the pandemic? NTD's Sam Wong was out on the National Mall in D.C. to hear from the people.
Under the leadership of RFK Jr., there's been a lot of discussions about vaccines, in terms of safety and efficacy. So I'm guessing the question here will be, do you think people should take the vaccine voluntarily, or do you think there should be some kind of mandate?
Voluntarily.
Well, voluntarily, yeah. Well, it's something that shouldn't be made to happen. The American people have to have some freedom, and otherwise you just take it away.
I think it's just our choice. You know, it's like when COVID came around, I didn't think we should have been mandatory to take COVID shots at all. I think we went a little too far with that to begin with.
There were some side effects and adverse things that happened allegedly from some of these vaccines, and then a lot of it might be because they rushed to do them and they weren't fully tested enough.
There is so much mistrust in the American people after the COVID vaccine and the forced. Now we know it didn't do anything, and we were forced to take it. We shut down schools, and kids lost their lives, their high school senior years.
I think that there were a lot of people, even in our government, that were paid to push it through more quickly. I don't know, especially the whole Fauci thing. I mean, I don't trust him. I think that there was some money being made that absolutely should not be part of our government.
There's also been a lot of discussion about Operation Warp Speed back in 2020. I'm sure you remember, you guys probably all remember this, right? So it was like a process of, just get the vaccine out within a short period of time. Do you think that period of time should be scrutinized as well?
I was thinking a lot about it, and there were a lot of side effects that were not shared with us, and we have family members that are suffering from some of those side effects.
What are the symptoms?
All the symptoms from long COVID, and some of the symptoms from cardiac problems.
Well, I think all of it should be put under a little bit more scrutiny, even though it was done expediently, and they did it quickly. That doesn't necessarily mean that they followed everything that they were supposed to do.
Our mother being in assisted living, and we couldn't visit, could only go to a window and talk through a window that was closed, and for what?
That we couldn't hug, kiss. Yeah, they made us be apart. She would be in the hospital. I was like, this is crazy that I can only see you when you're in the hospital, but I couldn't see her in her assisted living.
And you said it was the last month of her life?
The last few months of her life.
I think even to this day, we don't know if the vaccine, how effective it was, how it wasn't effective, we don't really know. I think we should have more data on it.
The Senate today also considering President Trump's nominee to the Federal Reserve Board. This as the Department of Justice opens a criminal investigation against Fed Governor Lisa Cook for mortgage fraud. Our Washington correspondent Luis Eduardo Martinez has the details.
Stephen Myron, who is currently serving as the chair of the Council of Economic Advisors under the current administration, is President Trump's pick to fill out the vacated seat in the Federal Reserve Board left open by Adriana Kugler, who resigned last month.
In my view, the most important job of the central bank is to prevent depressions and hyperinflations. Independence of monetary policy is a critical element for its success. Congress wisely tasked the Fed with pursuing price stability, maximum employment, and moderate long-term interest rates. If confirmed, I will transparently and honestly work towards that pursuit.
Senate Democrats have opposed the nomination of Myron in the wake of the Trump administration's decision to fire Lisa Cook, a Federal Reserve Board member who has been accused of mortgage fraud.
Your independence has already been seriously compromised by your statement. You are going to be technically an employee of the President of the United States, but an independent member of the Board of the Federal Reserve.
So we reported to the DOJ. She said that she had a second home, but then in her disclosures to the U.S. government, she called it an investment in rental property. Investments in rental properties are different than second homes. And back in that time frame, 2021, where she took out these 3 mortgages, you had different rates for these different types of classifications. So it's very concerning.
The Department of Justice has opened an investigation against Fed Governor Lisa Cook, who, despite being fired by the president, has decided not to step down from her position on the Federal Reserve Board and instead has sued the Trump administration.
The president absolutely has authority to fire a Fed governor for cause, and I think the accusations are serious.
But no, she seems to have had an infraction, and she can't have an infraction, especially that infraction, because she's in charge of, if you think about it, mortgages, and we need people that are 100% above board.
If the courts rule against Fed Governor Lisa Cook and confirm her dismissal, President Trump would have to nominate yet another Federal Reserve Board member to fill her vacated seat. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Washington, D.C. today filed a lawsuit against the Trump administration and the military over the deployment of the National Guard in the nation's capital. NTD's Arlene Richards has more.
Washington, D.C. is accusing President Trump, some cabinet members, and the Army of getting involved in domestic law enforcement. A lawsuit filed on Thursday comes one day after a California judge ruled that the administration illegally deployed the Guard and Marines in Los Angeles. Washington's Attorney General Brian Schwab filed the 52-page suit despite the D.C. mayor recently ordering local cooperation. Mayor Muriel Bowser ordered on Tuesday that local officials continue coordinating with federal officials. She wrote in the order that local leaders should ensure coordination with federal law enforcement to the maximum extent allowable by law within the district. Last month, Trump invoked Section 740 of the Home Rule Act, which allows presidents to take control of the D.C. Police Department during emergencies and enable federal use of local police services. He sent in members of the National Guard, ICE, and other government agencies to assist in cleaning up urban crime. The lawsuit claims D.C. leaders didn't request the help and argues the deployment of federal assistance was done without consent from the mayor and is illegal. The president's emergency declaration is set to expire on September 10th. Bowser's order seems to encourage cooperation with federal forces beyond the deadline, but she said on Wednesday that's not the case.
Let me tell you without equivocation that the mayor's order does not extend the Trump emergency. In fact, it does the exact opposite. What it does is lays out a framework for how we will exit the emergency.
She said there is a framework to request federal resources and that they didn't need a presidential emergency. Her statements and the lawsuit may come as a surprise to President Trump as he praised her cooperation. In a social media post on Monday, he said, "Wow, Mayor Muriel Bowser of D.C. has become very popular because she worked with me and my great people in bringing crime down to virtually nothing in D.C." After the lawsuit was filed on Thursday, Trump made a different post. In it, he compiled social media posts from several members of Congress that had applauded his efforts to reduce crime in our nation's capital. Arlene Richards, NTD News.
The president of Northwestern University is stepping down. Michael Schill announced his resignation today as the institution deals with federal funding cuts by the Trump administration. Schill has led the university for 3 years. He said in a statement that he would remain in the position until an interim president is named. In April, the Trump administration froze nearly $800 million in research funding for Northwestern. The freeze came after accusations the university wasn't doing enough to address anti-Semitism during campus protests against the war in Gaza. A White House spokesperson said the Trump administration looks forward to working with the new leadership at Northwestern. Education Secretary Linda McMahon reacts to a judge siding with Harvard University over funding cuts.
We certainly will appeal this ruling. We don't think that ruling is going to stand.
Watch more of her interview tonight on Capitol Report with Steve Lance at 7 p.m. Eastern Time. She'll share her perspective on AI and education and on the importance of promoting freedom of thought around the country. President Trump joining Ukrainian President Zelenskyy and European leaders for a call on the war in Ukraine. And at the White House, the First Lady is leading an AI education task force meeting as top tech leaders gather in the Rose Garden. NTD's Mari Otsu has more from the White House.
We talked to President Trump today. We are grateful for support.
President Trump joining a call with European leaders, and Ukrainian President Zelenskyy is saying that Europe must stop buying Russian oil that's funding the war in Ukraine.
The key to peace is to deprive Russian war machine of money, of resources.
President Trump is also calling on European leaders to put economic pressure on China. On Wednesday, the president emphasizing the importance of economic actions on Russia.
Would you say that putting secondary sanctions on India, the largest purchaser outside of China, they're almost equal, would you say there was no action? That cost hundreds of billions of dollars to Russia.
This comes as European leaders are gathering in Paris and joining in virtually in a coalition of the willing meeting to ensure security guarantees for Ukraine. President Zelenskyy is announcing that 26 countries have agreed to provide Ukraine with security guarantees and sharing the official documents in a flurry of posts on X. In other news, here at the White House, President Trump is hosting top tech leaders for a dinner. The expected guest list includes Apple CEO Tim Cook, Microsoft co-founder Bill Gates, Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg, and a dozen other AI and tech firm executives. Notably absent is Tesla CEO Elon Musk, who's saying on X that he was invited but unfortunately couldn't attend. This comes as the First Lady chairs an AI education task force meeting in the East Room with Google CEO Sundar Pichai in attendance, along with Secretaries of Education, Energy, and Labor. While predicting that AI may become, quote, the greatest engine of progress in U.S. history, the First Lady also warns.
It is our duty to treat AI as we would our own children, empowering but with watchful guidance. And it is our responsibility to prepare children in America.
First Lady Melania Trump has repeatedly taken up the mantle of technology and its impact on children. Earlier this year, she lobbied for the Take It Down Act, calling it heartbreaking to see teenage girls targeted by AI-generated deepfakes. And last week, the First Lady announced a presidential AI challenge, urging American students to create AI-based solutions to community problems. Reporting from the White House, Mariotsu, NTD News.
The president of France providing more details on the call with President Trump and what they agreed to. Various European leaders today talked about the need for Ukraine to be able to defend itself. NTD's international correspondent, Arian Pasdar, has more.
To everybody watching this, please, men and women, citizens of the Czech Republic and all over Europe, Canada and the US, let's not be naive about Russia.
NATO chief Mark Rutte advises citizens across the globe to be cautious of Moscow. He made the statement shortly after a phone call with members of the Coalition of the Willing, which is meeting in Paris on Thursday. The 30 members of the coalition are working on security guarantees for Ukraine.
We know what Putin tries to do, and the evidence is there in Ukraine as we speak, and it is there that's threat for the long term, I'm afraid.
French President Emmanuel Macron gave more details on the outcome of the call.
Et nous avons ensuite tenu
In the following days, we will finalize the American support to these security guarantees. The United States is involved in every step of this process.
Macron says 26 nations have pledged to provide post-war security guarantees to Ukraine. This includes an international force on land, on the sea, and in the air. But not all 26 nations will deploy troops. Some plan to provide guarantees while remaining outside Ukraine. Macron didn't say how many troops would be involved in the guarantees. European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen commented on the plans after Thursday's meetings.
We must turn Ukraine into a steel porcupine, indigestible for present and future aggressors.
She says this includes having a well-equipped modern force. Von der Leyen also says Europe will continue training Ukrainian soldiers. So far, almost 90,000 have received training. Arian Pasdar, NTD News.
Coming up, Israeli forces say they now control 40% of Gaza City, a Hamas stronghold. Meanwhile, a boy reportedly killed at an aid distribution site is found alive. Jason Perry reports. The U.S. designates 2 more gangs as foreign terrorist organizations. Secretary of State Marco Rubio made the announcement alongside officials in Ecuador working to combat crime and drug trafficking with more forceful measures. Jack Bradley has the details. And Congress listens to the threat to free speech from European digital laws. Testimonies tell of arrests over social media posts and how these laws impact U.S. companies. Malcolm Hudson brings us more on that after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. In the Middle East, Israeli forces say they now control 40% of Gaza City, one of Hamas's final strongholds. Meanwhile, a child who was reportedly killed at an aid distribution site in the Gaza Strip was found alive. NTD's Jason Perry has the story and a warning. This report contains footage that some viewers may find disturbing.
A woman in the Gaza Strip was seen running after her family member who was reportedly injured by an Israeli airstrike on Thursday. The strike hit a tent in Gaza City where Israeli troops have been increasing operations against the Hamas terrorist group. A relative of the people injured in the strike shared her thoughts.
The woman is getting ready to deliver the baby. Here are the Pampers for the baby. Make me understand. What is their fault? Is it a war against Hamas or a war against the people?
Israel has declared Gaza City a combat zone, but Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu explained why it's difficult for residents to leave.
Israel has sent millions of text and phone messages to Palestinian civilians urging them to get out of harm's way. Hamas shoots these civilians when they try to leave, and they do so in order to use the civilian population as human shields.
An Israel Defense Forces spokesperson said Israeli forces now control 40% of Gaza City, one of Hamas's final strongholds.
The operation will continue to expand and intensify in the coming days. Hamas will face the Israeli army forces in their full force in Gaza City. We will increase the pressure on Hamas until it is destroyed.
Meanwhile, a boy in the Gaza Strip who was reportedly killed at an aid distribution site was found alive after media reports said that a Gaza boy named Amir was shot and killed by Israeli forces at an aid distribution site. A spokesman for the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation said that after weeks of hard work, a GHF team found the boy and noted that he is still alive. Fox News interviewed the boy and his mother, who have now left the Gaza Strip.
Outside the Gaza Strip is nice.
The exact location of the boy and his mother has not been made public for safety reasons. Jason Perry, NTD News.
The U.S. designates Ecuador's two largest gangs as foreign terrorist groups. Secretary of State Marco Rubio made the announcement in Ecuador's capital alongside the country's top officials. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has the details.
Today we have designated as terrorist organizations two groups that operate here in Ecuadorian territory.
The U.S. designates two more criminal gangs as foreign terrorist organizations on Thursday. It's the latest in the Trump administration's efforts to combat drug trafficking in the U.S. The move affects Ecuador's Los Lobos and Los Choneros, two violent narcotics trafficking groups. The U.S. has designated other gangs as foreign terrorists via executive order, like Mexico's Sinaloa cartel and Venezuela's Tren de Aragua. And what happened to them? Well, earlier this week, the U.S. Navy shot down one of their drug-carrying boats, killing 11 Tren de Aragua gang members on board. This is a significant change in strategy to combat cartels. Before, the standard procedure was to intercept drug vessels, seize the drugs, and make arrests. But Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that wasn't working. Now, they're implementing more forceful measures.
Because these drug cartels, what they do is they know they're going to lose, 2% of their cargo. They bake it into their economics. What will stop them is when you blow them up, when you get rid of them. And it'll happen again.
Designating gangs as terrorist organizations allows authorities to freeze their assets in the U.S. and also to share intelligence with other governments so they can take out the gangs themselves. Secretary Rubio made the announcement while meeting with officials in Ecuador, who are themselves calling these gangs terrorists. The U.S. is providing Ecuador with $13.5 million to combat drugs and crime and another $6 million for military drones. Back in July, Ecuador authorities extradited the now terrorist-designated Los Choneros leader to the U.S. to face criminal charges. Last week, the Trump administration issued a life sentence to El Mayo, the head of the largest cartel in Mexico, Sinaloa.
He will never walk free again.
The Trump administration still has Navy warships dispatched to the Caribbean to combat drug trafficking to the U.S. U.S. Attorney Janine Piero said on Wednesday that her office seized over 700,000 pounds of meth precursor chemicals coming from China to Mexico's Sinaloa cartel. And on the same day, FBI Director Kash Patel announced Operation Box Cutter, which he said seized enough fentanyl to kill around 350,000 Americans. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
Are European digital regulations impacting free speech and American innovation? Congress heard testimonies of arrests over social media posts and was warned these European laws could have a global impact as a tool for censorship. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has more for us now.
A House Judiciary Committee hearing on Wednesday examined the European threats to American free speech and innovation. highlighting digital laws that lead to censorship of Americans and American companies. Representative Jim Jordan said the Europeans ought to cut red tape to let free enterprise flourish.
But these attacks on American companies won't result in a so-called European champion. Instead, China wins as Europe hurts both itself and America.
He said the European regulations distort the digital marketplace and added regulations like the EU's Digital Services Act and Britain's Online Safety Act are attacking free speech around the world. Politician and Reform UK party leader Nigel Farage described the free speech situation in Britain.
I first became worried about all this with cancel culture. You know, the idea that we can't have this speaker go to a university because some people might be offended by what he or she have to say.
Farage said this has been taken much further with a number of recent prominent arrests.
We, of course, have Lucy Connolly, who put out an intemperate tweet after the savage murder of those 3 beautiful young girls. She removed it 3.5 hours later, sentenced to 31 months in prison.
Connolly has since been released, but Farage said restrictions on her banned her from coming to the hearing. The most recent case is the arrest of Irish comedian Graham Linehan for 3 gender-critical tweets. Linehan said police asked him highly ideological questions using transgender activist language. The British Prime Minister said it was an operational decision by police who should focus on serious crimes, while the UK's Metropolitan Police Chief said ambiguity in the law leaves officers policing toxic culture war debates. Legal counsel Lorcan Price said he suspects European laws such as the Digital Services Act, or DSA, have an underlying political motive.
And a lot of what I think is inspiring the DSA is what we saw from Germany beginning after the election of President Trump and after Brexit, which is to control the narrative, slow down speech. And into that, then, they're throwing a very wide net out that's affecting all kinds of legitimate speech. We talked about my client Päivi Räsänen in Finland, who's prosecuted for sharing a tweet from the Bible. It's absolutely outrageous, and that becomes now the standard that the DSA will set, not just for Europe, but possibly and predictably globally.
Price said the European Union is seeking to set the global standard when it comes to speech.
And because of the laws that I just outlined in Europe, the type of prosecutions we're seeing, it's an extremely low standard. It draws, I would suggest to you, a digital curtain where once there was an iron curtain. And US companies bear the brunt disproportionately of this. They're hijacked by the DSA to become essentially the EU's global censorship police, whether they like it or not.
He said democracy requires free speech and that a stand must be taken against this wave of censorship. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News.
Italian designer Giorgio Armani has passed away. His fashion house confirmed the news this morning, saying Armani died at home. Armani was one of the most recognizable names and faces in the global fashion industry. He missed Milan Fashion Week in June this year to recover from an undisclosed condition. He was planning a major event this month to celebrate 50 years of the Giorgio Armani fashion house. According to Forbes, at the time of his death, Armani had put together an empire worth over $10 billion. He ranked among the world's top 200 billionaires. Giorgio Armani was 91. Coming up, the federal government is suing Southern California Edison, alleging its equipment sparked deadly wildfires. Christina Corona has more on the lawsuits that are seeking millions in damages for fires that devastated national forest lands and homes. And the new Tesla Robotaxi app is now available, but only in 2 states. Users may have to be put on a wait list, but the service is expanding. David Lamb tells us more when we return. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Trump today took part virtually in a summit of Ukraine's top allies known as the Coalition of the Willing. It was hosted in Paris by French President Emmanuel Macron. Joining us now to discuss the key takeaways from that meeting is retired U.S. Marine Colonel Grant Newsham. He's currently a senior fellow at the Center for Security Policy. Grant, as always, thank you so much for joining us. Now, during his virtual participation, President Trump told EU leaders that President Putin is capitalizing on their importing of Russian oil. Eurostat reports that in the first quarter of this year, Europe bought $1.7 billion worth of Russian oil, compared to $16.4 billion they bought in the same quarter of 2021. Now, what other sources does the EU have, as in what would it take to cut off that final trickle of Russian oil?
Well, they're going to have to get their own energy house in order. And some countries, for example, have, like the Germans, have shut down their nuclear power plants. They've shut down coal power plants. And once you do that, you've got to get energy from somewhere. And you have other countries in the EU which have similar problems. So they're going to have to buy the energies from someplace. And the United States is rolling in oil, natural gas. No reason they couldn't get it there. But you've got to find alternative sources. But this is the outcome of the Europeans getting into bed with the Russians when it came to their energy sources. And the idea was that would be what they would be buying forever. How short-sighted can you be? So they're going to have to really sort of buckle down to get rid of this last dependency. And also keep in mind that some of the energy that comes into the EU is actually sort of laundered through Turkey and or India. But they're making progress. But when you think about it, the Europeans have been funding Putin's war in Ukraine to some extent. That is just crazy.
Now, since the war began, India and China have ramped up their oil imports from Russia. Would cutting off China from Russian oil have a greater impact on Putin's war effort?
Well, much greater. And it's not just oil and energy that the Chinese have been buying. It's the other material support, the technological support, the approval they give to the North Koreans to go all out on supporting the Russians. China is really the center point if you're going to go after this. Picking on the Indians is easy, and the Trump administration has been picking on them. Yes, the Indians shouldn't be buying as much from the Russians as they are, but the real problem is China. It's not the Indians. The Indians are our friends, and we shouldn't be driving them away. But China is the key, and you will notice that the Americans really haven't done anything to crack down on the Chinese while they've been leaning on the Indians. And in this meeting, of course, Mr. Trump told the Europeans to get tough on China as well. So hopefully we'll start getting tough on them too.
I want to get to China more, but first, France's Macron said after the summit today that if Russia continues to reject peace talks, there would be new sanctions in coordination with Washington. What could that look like?
Well, it would be a complete sort of cessation of trade and business with Russia. You know, we've been talking about oil and energy, but the Europeans have been buying some other things from the Russians as well. You'd be surprised just how much business does get done. The Americans have done a pretty good job of cutting off most commercial dealings with the Russians. The Europeans still have a long way to go, but you'll also note that President Macron, he also said, if the Russians don't do this, the Europeans will. Well, the war's been going on 3 years, and he's talking about something they might do if the Russians don't end the war. You know, it's about time that they move ahead with this.
Now, expanding on your earlier point, President Trump also said there needs to be coordinated economic pressure on China for also assisting Moscow. We just saw Putin in China for the military parade there. Talk to us more about China's role in helping Russia so far.
Sure. Well, almost from the first day of the war, the Chinese have been providing aid to the Russians. The Biden administration actually suppressed that information for a long time. But there were sort of blacked out flights going from China into Russia with some sensitive technologies necessary to let Mr. Putin run his war. And the Chinese have provided hardware, technology, dual-use technologies that are essential for operating a modern military. And as I said, they have allowed the North Koreans to go ahead and provide ammunition, artillery, shells, and at least 10,000 troops to support the Russians. So Chinese support has been full-throated, and they haven't let up. Also, the drones that get mentioned a lot, that are a big part of the Russian war effort. The Iranians provide a lot of those. The Chinese buy 90% of Iran's oil, or Iran uses that money to build the drones, send them to Russia. There's Chinese components in all of these drones. And now the Chinese are sending fully made drones to Russia and pretty much saying to the Americans, well, what are you going to do about it? They're not even hiding the support that they've given.
And given all of that, what would economic pressure on China look like, considering that the U.S. hasn't yet struck a trade deal with China?
Well, the first thing you would do is you would pull the People's Bank of China's license to operate in the US dollar system and then go on to the next 10 Chinese financial institutions. That would cause them some trouble. And then you've got to really cut technology exports to China. You would put a block on any sort of Chinese investment in the United States. You would force divestment of Chinese interests, say land that they own, stocks they've got listed on US exchanges. You just end that. And you would expose Xi Jinping and the top CCP, Chinese Communist Party leadership's obscene wealth, much of it stashed in the United States and Canada, the United Kingdom. Those are some things you have to do, but the idea that somehow you're going to continue normal economic relations with China while China is funding and supporting the Russians, that is illogical, and it's pretty much a guarantee that we're not going to win. And as is widely reported, the Chinese said the other day, well, we're glad to have the Ukraine war going because it distracts the Americans. It doesn't let them focus on Taiwan, on the Western Pacific, or on China. So it's in China's interest to keep the Ukraine war going. So why exactly would we fund this? Why would we give China the wherewithal so that they can then support Putin against the Ukrainians? I think that question pretty much answers itself.
Well, Grant Newsham, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you. Glad to be here.
The Justice Department is taking Southern California Edison to court. Federal prosecutors say the utility's equipment sparked 2 major wildfires in 2022 and 2025, killing dozens of people, destroying thousands of structures, and burning thousands of acres of forest land. NTD's Christina Corona reports.
Federal officials filed 2 lawsuits Thursday against Southern California Edison, alleging its equipment sparked 2 wildfires, including the Eaton fire in Altadena. The lawsuits cite negligence, trespass by fire, and violations of California public safety laws. Officials say the January 2025 Eaton fire was ignited by faulty Edison power lines, burning nearly 8,000 acres in Angeles National Forest. The blaze killed 19 people and destroyed more than 10,000 structures in Altadena. Bill Asaley, the acting U.S. attorney in Los Angeles, wrote on X, "We are demanding that Edison, not its ratepayers, pay for its negligence. Edison must not be allowed to pass along its liability onto hardworking ratepayers." He goes on to say, the United States seeks to recover financial losses from fire suppression and damage to national forest lands. These lawsuits do not include Edison's liability for private homes and other private property damage. The second case blames a sagging power line for starting the September 2022 Fairview fire. That blaze burned nearly 14,000 acres in Riverside County. Prosecutors argue Edison ignored fire risks and failed to upgrade equipment. The Justice Department is seeking more than $77 million in damages. Edison has not yet commented on the lawsuits. An investigation into the Palisades fire is still underway. Christina Corona, NTD News.
Another ride-sharing app opens to the public. Tesla's Robotaxi service hits the market and is expanding, but it's currently available in only 2 states. NTD's David Lamb has more.
Tesla's Robotaxi app is now available to Apple iPhone users. People can download it to join the wait list, and it works similarly to other ride-sharing apps such as Uber, Lyft, and Waymo. The service is currently available at 2 locations, the San Francisco Bay Area and certain parts of Austin, Texas, and runs from 6 a.m. to midnight. Robotaxi says riders are not allowed to sit in the driver's seat. The autonomous Tesla Robotaxi service was rolled out in Austin in June and expanded to San Francisco in July. On August 26, the company said it nearly doubled the service area from around 90 square miles to 170 and increased the number of cars available by 50%. Robotaxi says it currently charges a flat rate for the service, but this could change. It also plans to expand access soon with support for Android coming in the future. David Lamb, NTD News.
Coming up in the NFL, after a 6-month offseason, the regular season kicks off tonight with the Super Bowl champions getting their rings. Dave Martin reports. And France's famed dining culture is under strain as restaurants lose customers. While tourism supports the sector, French people are changing their habits. David Vivez has more from Paris when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. After a nearly 7-month-long offseason, the NFL starts up again tonight as the defending champion Philadelphia Eagles play host to their division rivals, the Dallas Cowboys. NTD's Dave Martin has more.
The last time the Philadelphia Eagles were on the field, they were busy celebrating a blowout Super Bowl win over the Kansas City Chiefs last February. Since then, little has been done to dissuade anyone that the Eagles should be on the short list of betting favorites to win it again this year. But odds makers instead have both the Buffalo Bills and Baltimore Ravens listed just ahead of Philadelphia to win this year's title. Why? Maybe because repeating as champions has become a rarity in a league full of parity. For example, when the Kansas City Chiefs won back-to-back Super Bowls after the 2022 and 2023 seasons, it marked the first time a team had done so since Tom Brady's Patriots accomplished the feat nearly 20 years ago. And never has a franchise won it 3 straight times. Meanwhile, the aforementioned favorites, the Bills and Ravens, are both AFC teams, marking the 12th straight year the betting favorite has come from this conference. A far cry from the 80s and 90s when the NFC's best routinely steamrolled whatever AFC team showed up at the Super Bowl. But tonight, the Eagles are listed as 8.5-point favorites over a Cowboys team that may still be reeling over the shocking trade of edge rusher Micah Parsons. Cowboys owner Jerry Jones, though, touted the trade as a way to upgrade their run defense. But the question of whether the pass defense will be able to adequately replace Parsons' incredible pass rushing talent remains to be seen. Tonight's game starts at 8:20 Eastern Time and will be available on NBC and Peacock. This is Dave Martin for NTD News.
France's famed dining culture is under strain as restaurants lose customers. Rising prices, tighter budgets, and new habits are reshaping how people eat out, leaving many restaurant owners struggling to adapt. NTD international correspondent David Yves reports from Paris.
France is known for its long lunches and lingering dinners. However, many restaurant owners said they've seen fewer customers lately. Professional points to rising prices, driven by inflation as a key factor. According to the Hospitality Union, restaurant attendance fell 15 to 20% in July and August, with some regions seeing drops of up to 30%. Diners are also ordering less, skipping starters, sharing desserts, and choosing a glass of wine instead of a bottle. Restaurant owner Alain Fontaine says this is part of a trend that began 5 years ago.
In fact, just to assess how dangerous the situation is, 25 restaurants are closing every day. Since the COVID crisis, there has been a clear acceleration. There was a slow decline before, now there is a sharp one. We are seeing more bankruptcies, the desertification of restaurants, and a shift in consumption habits.
He says there are many factors behind the shift. In addition to the rising cost of living, Fontaine says remote work after COVID has encouraged people to order food deliveries instead of dining out.
We let the French and tourists go to fast food restaurants, steam restaurants, and others. And that's something the government needs to respond to today. Because that's a fact. In 2030, or rather in 2040, there will be no more traditional restaurants in France as you know them if we don't react.
Fontaine is a restaurant owner who continues to practice what's called traditional French cuisine, a menu priced between $16 and $27 on average, including starter, main course and dessert, made with fresh ingredients and with dishes rooted in French culinary traditions. While some French restaurant owners have chosen not to raise prices and still manage to do well, newcomers to the restaurant world face very steep challenges. He says there's hope to change the shift, pointing to tourism as a major supporter of French cuisine.
We know that 43% of tourists who come to France come for the food, for the appeal of the food. When Americans come in and see the decor and hear the way we talk, the way we express ourselves, and taste the food and say amazing, it's like a medal for me every time. That's it. We have to save that. We must remain optimistic. There is a generation of young people who are truly enthusiastic and passionate about this profession. As I said, we will have to give them the means to communicate, but we must also be careful to reintroduce restaurants in local communities.
In September 2024, Fontaine succeeded in having French restaurants and cafes added to UNESCO's Intangible Cultural Heritage list. David Vives, NTD News, Paris.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com/live or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.